Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Buckley, and I'm with OCTA's Public Outreach team. I will be facilitating tonight's meeting on the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study. We appreciate that you're spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's focus is on the study and the draft alternative concepts that we've developed. I'd like to start by introducing the panelists. First, the project manager, Rebecca Soto.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Rebecca Soto. I'm a regional rail planner for OCTA.
I'm George Roscoe with HDR, and I'm the Deputy Project Manager.
And I'm Russ Boudreau. I'm a coastal engineer with Coastal Frontiers Corporation.
And I'm Avi Shah with HDR, the engineering lead.
Excellent, thank you. Nancy, let's turn it over to you for the interpretation information.
Thank you, Chris. So thank you everybody for joining us today. At this moment, I will ask you all to please select a language of your choice. At the bottom of your screen, you should see an interpretation globe. There you can select English or Spanish. If you want to hear Spanish interpretation only, you can click on mute original audio. Hola, gracias por acompañarnos para esta reunión pública. Si gustan escuchar la interpretación en español, por favor hagan clic en el icono de interpretación y seleccionen español. Para escuchar solo el español, hagan clic en Mute Original Audio o silenciar el audio original. Gracias. Back to you, Chris.
Excellent, thank you, Nancy, appreciate that. So before we get started, I wanted to highlight a few quick ground rules to help us have a productive meeting. OCTA is committed to making sure everyone has a fair opportunity to speak, be heard, and contribute to this process. To support that, we're going to ask that all participants respect the format of the meeting, treat others with respect, address all comments to the panel, and keep a conversational tone. This helps ensure that we hear a wide range of perspectives. We've got a simple goal: share information, answer questions, and hear your feedback. Next slide. So a little bit about the meeting, a few logistics before we begin. The meeting is being recorded, and that'll accurately capture your input. We will be posting that recording probably before the end of the week so that anybody else can take a look at it. Comments will be addressed after the presentation during the Q&A session. Written comments and questions can be submitted through the Q&A function. Participants will be able to view those comments in real time. Both written and verbal comments are equally considered by the team. To use closed captioning, select CC at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And if you'd like to talk, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. State your name prior to providing your comment, please. Next slide. So a couple of different ways to participate, right? Obviously, many of you via web. If you want to make verbal comments, click participants and then raise hand. You could type your comment as well. You can click the Q&A function to do that. Please include contact information, name and organization, if any. When announced, unmute your audio and you can then ask your question. You will be remuted once you've completed your comment or question. If you're calling in, you're going to press *9 on your keypad to raise your hand. Then you'll be announced by the last 4 digits of your phone number. And then we'll want you to press *6 to unmute your audio. And then you also will be remuted once you've completed your comment or question. As a reminder, the chat is used just by our team. It's exclusively to share information and links to resources. Also, a quick reminder before we go to the next one, the Q&A is after the presentation. We aren't going to take any questions in the middle of the presentation, just so we can work everybody through that. It's pretty extensive. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Rebecca to run through the agenda, and then we'll begin our presentation here.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. So on the screen, you can see our agenda for the meeting this evening. We'll start off reviewing the meeting's purpose and focus, do a brief overview of the history of this project or the study and what's brought us here, the draft alternative concepts that we will be presenting to you all today, and then followed by a Q&A session where you'll be able to provide comments, ask questions, and then we will review the next steps following the meeting this evening. Next slide. Okay, so on the screen here, you can see there's a few different kind of coastal resiliency efforts that OCTA has going on. Today's focus is on the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study, which highlights short to mid-term solutions in the form of these draft alternative concepts focused on that short to mid-term timeframe, which for the purposes of this study is about 10 to 30 years that we want to protect that railroad in place. And so this is where we're at currently. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we've got a timeline showing the different history of service impacts. You can see that there's been some different closures since the opening of the line. However, as we enter in around fall of 2021, you can notice that there's quite a bit of an uptick in closures. Recently, we've had 5 closures just within the last few years alone, with the most recent one taking place in May 2025, which allowed for some emergency work to be completed along certain segments of this rail corridor. However, I do want to point out that as of early June, service has since resumed. Moving forward so just very quickly for the study, we kicked this study off originally in late 2023 with the goal of assessing existing and future risks and challenges, as well as exploring potential solutions to protect the rail line in place. It's that 7-mile segment running through South Orange County that you can see on the picture there. Following the kind of kickoff of this study, OCTA did hold some listening sessions in January through May of last year with the goal of obtaining stakeholder and community feedback, which has been very helpful. And then in December 2024, so just this past December, we did conduct an expert panel to review some of these draft alternative concepts that we will go over in more detail here shortly. So currently, the study has been split into 3 timeframe sort of concentrations. We have the immediate need, which is basically anything between now and 10 years, the short to midterm, the 10 to 30 years, which is today's focus again. And then eventually there will be a longer term solution sort of study that will be led by the state. At this time, we don't have a timeline for that, but that will be coming down the pipeline in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, so really quick, these draft alternative concepts. So the purpose of having these concepts ultimately is it was brought about by identifying and assessing the vulnerable locations throughout that 7-mile rail sort of segment that are at risk of railroad damage or operational disruptions. We have gone through a process to evaluate and prioritize different adaptation strategies and engineering solutions that would ideally maintain railroad operations throughout that segment, generally within the existing right-of-way for up to the next 30 years. And the reason why we need to do this is because ultimately we need to make sure that the railroad corridor remains safe, stable, and dependable, with passenger and freight rail service being able to move and operate safely. Next slide, please. And again, the goals and objectives, just to reiterate, We are committed to a continual stakeholder engagement. We're hoping to minimize passenger and freight service disruptions moving forward by hopefully protecting the railroad in place and continuing to use these solutions to develop a program of capital projects within OCTA's right-of-way, and then ultimately coordinate with our adjacent stakeholders to develop a more regional sort of comprehensive coastal capital program with roles and responsibilities that address coastal erosion challenges outside of OCTA's right-of-way. Next slide, please. Okay, so just looking at next steps, looking at our timeline. So here today, again, we're going over the draft concept development and those alternatives that we have. So we're presenting to you those this evening. We're hoping to obtain your feedback. So then we can go back and review and continue to refine those concepts. But where we're at right now is presenting them to you and getting some of your initial thoughts to continue to guide us as we go through this process. Next slide. So those alternative concepts, what we've done is we have separated them into three sort of categories. We have bluff side concepts, which would be kind of the landward side of the rail corridor, beachside concepts or the seaside. And then we have the rail concepts, which focuses on the rail, on the actual rail itself. So go ahead and next slide, please. Okay, so here, as you can see, what we've done is in those three different categories, we've kind of grouped the different alternative concepts or solutions here in this case. And there's no order of preference. They're in there all as a group. And ideally is to serve as sort of a bit of menu with the 7 Mile Rail segment. There's, the different sections and areas have different needs. There's different nuances to the erosion challenges in each section. And so what these aim to do is provide us a list of different options that may be applicable throughout the corridor, but maybe not through the entire length. Maybe we need to pick, a couple of one category and apply it to one section, maybe a couple from another category to another section, and so forth. But ultimately, we have this list that's been broken down into these different categories. Next slide, please. Okay, and so before I hand it off to George, who's going to walk us through how those different concepts sort of apply to the different areas, and then you can see how we're kind of envisioning using these concepts and applying them as we move forward. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to George.
So on the next two slides, what you're going to see is a map, and on the map is milepost markers. So as you start off from the top left of the screen here, you'll see milepost 200.1. This is in the city of Dana Point, and you'll see a color-coded line that is tracking on the basically the center line of track. And then these color-coded lines have a TS with a number after them. And what we mean by that is typical section 1 or typical section 2. We have a total of 7 typical sections, and they are labeled also at the bottom of the slide as well. There is a legend that shows you the color coding for each typical section, but we also have those marked as well. So as we're going through this entire 7 to 7.5 mile stretch, what you're going to see in the next slides as we describe each of these typical sections is that the land use characteristics on either side of the track, either on the beach side or on the bluff side, things will change. So you'll see either the ocean water with a lot of sand or not a lot of beach sand between it. Maybe there's other kind of infrastructure like parking lots. or sometimes even homes in front of the railroad. Then you get to the rail line, then you'll also see a pedestrian trail that could be on one side or the other. And then on the landward side, you'll see that there are sometimes bluffs, there's sometimes homes on top of those bluffs, and those bluffs could sometimes be taller or shorter. And so we're trying to look at this entire 7.5 mile stretch and delineate the typical, what we call a typical section for the existing condition, and then apply whatever applicable draft alternatives from each of those three lists that Rebecca mentioned, from the bluff side to the rail side to the ocean side, the beach side. So we'll go ahead and start with the first typical section. So over on the right, you'll see the more cartoonish figure, which shows the ocean water with a decently wide beach, with some minor riprap, a parking lot, followed by the actual railroad right-of-way with the track there. And then you have Coast Highway and the bluffs. On the left side of the screen, you'll see a picture of what that typical condition looks like out there. And then on the bottom side of all of these slides, what you'll see is a milepost marker and kind of legend here. And you'll see the color of that typical section that you had on your first map. And you'll see what this milepost stretch that we are referring to. So you'll see the limits. So for this particular typical section, we find ourselves in the city of Dana Point. There's one long stretch there from milepost 200.1 to about milepost 201.5, and then a little bit more, about a quarter mile into milepost 202.75 to 203, which goes into the city of San Clemente portion. Next slide. So in looking at the bluff side, beach side, and rail side, starting off with bluff side, draft alternative concepts that we consider here. The bluff in this particular typical section is on the other side of Coast Highway. It's at a good distance away, not creating any kind of risk to the railroad at this time. So there was the determination that no action needs to be taken at this time. On the beach side, the beach, as you can see it, is separated by some of that minor riprap and a parking lot. And so the railroad right-of-way is being protected by some of those land use characteristics there. And so the kind of beachside draft alternative that are being considered here is really looking at the watershed modifications to increase beach sand supply, which this has to deal with the natural erosion that happens through the rivers and creeks that bring in that sediment into the ocean. And that's something that is outside of the railroad's control. So that would be something implemented by others, or for the railroad to collaborate with other regional beach sand projects in the area. And then lastly, on the rail side, we are looking at alternative materials for critical railroad infrastructure to reduce life cycle costs. And what this is in reference to is that you are in a marine environment, and the railroad infrastructure there with a lot of the metal pieces into it suffers from that marine environment. There's a lot of corrosion, and a lot of the assets on the railroad are basically degraded much quicker than typical. So we would be looking at maybe other kind of materials that can withstand the marine environment. Next slide. Typical section 2. This again is the orange stretch there on the bottom. There's 2 stretches of this. On the right-hand side, you'll see the cartoon kind of typical section where you have, again, the ocean water with some beach and some minor riprap, followed by a decent stretch of residential area, then the railroad, followed by a trail, bike trail with the Coast Highway 101 there, and then the bluffs. So when we look at the concepts, next slide, that would be applicable to this section. On the bluff side, similar, the bluff is far enough away on the other side of Coast Highway, doesn't pose a lot of risk to the railroad, so there is no action to be taken for now. On the beach side, similar to typical section 1, just looking at where that beach sand supply is naturally coming from. And so others who have that jurisdiction would be looking at that, and then any collaboration with regional beach sand projects. And then on the rail side, similar to alternative typical section 1, we're looking at the alternative materials for railroad infrastructure to better withstand the marine environment. Next slide. Typical section 3, there is the stretch here at North Beach, immediately north of the station, where you have the ocean with a wide beach, approximately about 100 feet. You have a riprap area followed by the railroad, and then parking lot on the left-hand side. And there's really no bluff present here in the immediate vicinity of this short typical section. As you can see on the bottom, that purple color there is a very short stretch. So on the next slide, you'll see that on the bluff side, there are no bluffs in this typical section, so there's no action to be taken. And then on the rail side, again, just looking at alternative materials to be able to withstand the marine environment. And then on the beach side, this is where we can consider a lot of the beachside draft alternative concepts that are presented in your handout. Again, just want to remind folks that the handout is in the link that was provided in the chat. So if you look at that and reference back to the slew of beachside or bluffside concepts, we're looking at all of those, and if they are applicable at every typical section along the way. So we have things like riprap placement, where similar to what has been done in the Mariposa area, a very thought out way of placing that riprap back into place, or looking at a more engineered rock revetment, or even a vertical seawall, or a hybrid of these in terms of a hybrid structural solution. Or you could look at doing beach nourishment with a shoreline protection structure, or a beach nourishment with some kind of sand retention measures and a shoreline protection structure as well. And on top of all of that, there's also the option of collaborating with a greater regional beach sand replenishment project. Next slide. For typical section 4, again, on the bottom, you'll see the green stretches where this typical section applies. And this is where you're starting to see the changes in what's happening, especially on the bluff side, in relationships to how tall those bluffs are, and if there are residential structures up on top or not. And so as we go through typical sections 4, 5, 6, and 7, you're going to start to see some of these nuances play out. So with typical section 4, you have the ocean, the beach sand there, riprap in some areas, the track, the trail with bluffs and residential homes on top. On the next slide, the type of draft alternative concepts that are being considered here on the bluff side is looking at catchment walls, similar to what you see at the Casa Romantica area. These are blocking the slide and debris that's coming off, that's sloughing off of these bluffs. You could do stabilization and grading, where we are trying to buttress the toe of the slope so that way it doesn't slide out. You could look at tieback or soil nail or pin pile wall solutions. This will be a much larger structural draft alternative concept that seeks to stabilize the entire bluff, or looking at ground improvements, or hydro augers that are looking at lowering the hydraulic pressure in the water that is seeping through the bluffs, and being able to control and get that water out of the bluffs to provide the greater stability. On the rail side, through these typical sections here, you'll see that there is a potential in some of these areas to also look at elevating the tracks. And when we talk about elevating the tracks, we're talking probably in the range of a couple feet, just to not have to deal with sometimes, in the king tides and some of the high tides, where you're getting some wave action. There's also the alternative materials, as I mentioned in the other typical sections. And in some areas, as the water comes off of the bluffs, it kind of saturates the soils underneath the track. So we're looking at some ground improvement to allow for track bed stabilization. Next slide. And then on the beach side for typical section 4, again, a variety of draft alternative concepts that could be applied here as well. Everything from riprap placement to an engineered rock revetment or a vertical seawall, a hybrid structural solution of those three, or looking at the beach nourishment side with shoreline protection or with sand retention, and doing all of that in collaboration with other regional beach sand replenishment projects. Next slide, typical section 5. So here, the typical section on the cartoon figure you'll see on the right, you have the ocean with minimal to no beach sand there, to riprap in most of those areas, to then the track within the railroad right-of-way. The trail is present there in some areas, and then you have the bluffs with residential spaces on top. On the bottom of the slide, you'll again see that kind of purple blue color from milepost 204 to like 204.5, and then again at the southernmost stretch here in the milepost 206.7 to all the way down to 207.4 at the county line. So the draft alternative concepts that are being considered at this typical section on the bluff side, looking at the catchment walls, or grading the slopes to allow for greater stability, tieback solutions with soil nail or pin pile walls, or just looking at ground improvements, looking at even maybe doing upgradient cutoff drains. So trying to find where that source of the water is coming from and mitigating it at that point before it can come in and seep into the bluffs. And the last draft alternative concept with the hydro augers, where you're trying to now lower the hydraulic pressure by removing that water from inside the bluff. Next slide. On the beach side, also looking at riprap placement, engineered rock revetment, or a vertical seawall, or a combination of those. And then also looking at the beach nourishment options with shoreline protection structures, or with sand retention measures. And then on the rail side, looking at elevating the tracks, as well as the alternative materials to help with the life cycle cost of the rail assets. Next slide, typical section 6. This one is right around the pier and north of the pier, about milepost 204.5 to milepost 205.0. You have on the right-hand side the ocean water with a wide beach, approximately 100 feet, followed by the trail, and then the railroad, and then the bluffs. And so on this particular typical section, next slide, what you'll see is on the bluff side, we're looking at just catchment walls to block any of the debris that might be coming off. On the beach side, there is a decently wide beach protecting the railroad there. So we would be collaborating with others that might be leading any kind of regional beach sand projects. And then for the rail itself, just looking at alternative materials to be able to support the life cycle of the rail asset. And then on to our last typical section here, typical section 7. This one has the ocean water with some beach stretched there with riprap in some areas. And then you have the railroad with the trail, and then a much smaller bluff, so to speak, with residential there on top. And the picture on the left, I think you'll able to see it because there are a couple stretches where that bluff is down below, as opposed to that very tall bluff that you see there further down beyond this stretch. So in this milepost 205 to 206, that 1 mile stretch, you'll see a lot of this kind of shifting of these typical sections happening, where you do have that bluff being very low, not that tall, and then boom, it goes right back up to a much taller bluff. And so these typical sections of the existing conditions just change here pretty quickly. Next slide. On the bluff side, because those bluffs are really not that tall, we are proposing that no action be taken there. However, on the beach side, looking at a engineered rock revetment with the wider beach that is present there, I think it would be something that would last, especially for the short and the midterm duration. And then looking also at beach nourishment with shoreline protection structures, while also collaborating with others in the region, either looking at the beach sand supply, where that's coming from, and looking at the regional beach sand programs or projects and collaborating with them. Then on the rail side, we would be looking at alternative materials, again, to help with the marine environment. Next slide. Chris, I'll hand this back to you.
Thank you, George, and thank you, Rebecca, as well, for your earlier information. So now we're going to take your questions and comments. Just as a reminder, this is not a decision-making meeting. We're here to gather input from you on the draft alternative concepts and answer questions as we continue shaping those concepts. We want this to be a productive and respectful exchange, so please keep your questions and comments to 2 minutes and direct them to the panel. Thank you very much. We've got 3 hands up. Shall we start with those? Next, Susie Whitelaw.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, Susie, we're all set. Go ahead.
Hi, yes, I represent Save Our Beaches San Clemente, and I would like to address the beachside components here. Number 1 is riprap placement. That hasn't worked. Number 2, engineered rock revetment. That is a I have no problem with that as long as it is a limited footprint. The 60-foot wide footprint of rock revetment has not worked to protect the tracks down at the south end of San Clemente, and it destroyed the beach at the south end of San Clemente. And so that would work if it's a very narrow replacement of what is, or strengthening of what's already there. vertical seawall is going to be absolutely one of the worst possibilities. That's going to completely destroy the beach. Hybrid structural solution number 4, that's kind of like a wild card. And it seems to me like you're going to include both the footprint of the rock revetment and the vertical seawall. And so it's the worst of both worlds. So I think that numbers 1 through 4, you basically just should delete those. Nobody wants those. 5 and 6, where there's some kind of shoreline protection with sand replenishment, is the only options that would be acceptable to San Clemente. Number 7, watershed modifications aren't going to happen. And number 8, no railroad action would also be acceptable. We would rather have no action than covering up our sand with beaches. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. Appreciate your comments. Next up, we have Brian Yanity. Go ahead, Brian.
Hello, good evening. My name is Brian Yanity. I am Vice President South of the Rail Passenger Association of California, or RailPAC. We're an all-volunteer nonprofit organization representing the interest of rail passengers in the state since 1978. So, of course, we want rail service to continue uninterrupted for passenger trains through San Clemente. We commend the work of the OCA team and the consultants. And per the agreement, when OCTA purchased the Surfline track from the Santa Fe Railway in 1993, it is legally obligated to provide an operable railroad between Orange and San Diego counties. These obligations are to the Santa Fe successor, the BNSF Railway, Amtrak, and the Southern California Regional Rail Authority, or Metrolink. Coastal erosion and protection is not our expertise, but we feel that OCTA needs to pursue the most effective means of protecting the railroad track. If some form of rock protection is needed to protect the track from major storms and high seas, then OCTA should pursue this solution. Sand replenishment alone is a temporary but expensive fix, and there's quite a lead time to get enough sand. But it's unlikely to provide, much protection for the rail line in major storms. So ultimately, though, the only permanent solution is to move the rail line off the beach via new inland alignment, most likely along or beneath I-5. In addition to obviously being good for rail service, it would reduce the need for riprap and give the beach a better chance of surviving. That's what the experts are saying. And it's in everyone's interest to seek a permanent solution. And I'm glad that OCTA and others in this are working with the state on studying an inland bypass solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate those comments as well. Next up, Gary Walsh. Mr. Walsh.
There we go. Okay, I believe you can hear me now. Is that correct?
We can.
Okay, great. Gary Walsh, I'm with Save Our Beaches SC. And what I would like to speak to you about is just the placement of sand and the obligation of you guys as consultants to OCTA and to OCTA itself to the citizens that it serves. And outside of the military, there's not a single governmental agency who's been created whose mission it is to do harm in the pursuit of goals. Government agencies are created to enhance the lives whom they serve. And the Orange County Transportation Agency has ingrained into their mission to do public good. But we can see what they're doing in pursuit of their mission is harm. They're destroying beaches. They're going to take away a natural resource. They've already done that down at Cotton's Point, where they extended out the riprap, and they've cut off the coastal trail, which was at one time there. And now they're proposing to put in seawalls and an extension of that riprap all the way up almost 2/3 of a mile in the state beach area. This will effectively destroy that beach. That is not doing good for the public to eliminate the beach. They can put sand down and protect their tracks. It's been proven over and over. It was their best armoring for the last 130 years. And by their own admission of the directors, if they put down 1 million cubic feet of sand, it would protect the tracks. So I want you to think seriously about putting sand down as a method of protecting the tracks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Thanks for your input. I'm going to turn now to the Q&A section. We have a couple of different comments. I'm going to go in chronological order. For railroad beach side, this comes from Ryan Gunn. Please only consider options 5 to 8 that include sand replenishment. It appears that sand is the most effective method to reduce erosion issues, protect the tracks long term, and maintain our beaches. Sand is the way to push the water back. Thank you, Mr. Gunn. Michaela Coates. Have nature-based solutions such as vegetated dune restoration or cobble boulder berms. Have they been explored as feasible concepts is the question. So have nature-based solutions such as vegetated dune restoration or cobble boulder berms been explored as feasible concepts? Who would be good to take that question, George? Avi?
Yeah, that would be for Russ.
Fantastic. Russ, if you could jump in, that'd be great.
Yes, really good question, by the way. So nature-based solutions kind of work with nature, and your comment kind of hit two of the key ones, either vegetated dunes or cobble berms. The key thing about both of those is they both really rely on having a sand beach to work with. In other words, for vegetated dunes to work, you pretty much need to have a beach with 50 to 100 feet of width in front of it. Otherwise, anytime you get a storm, you're going to lose that vegetated dune, and if you have nothing behind it to protect it, then the railroad will be at risk. Similarly, with the cobble dunes, they've had some good success up in Ventura County at the Ventura County Fairgrounds. One of the key things up there is there's a lot of cobble that occurs there naturally, but one of the things about cobble is, yeah, it's nature-based. You see a lot of it on the shoreline, but it can change the character of the beach. It's like a very, very coarse sand, if you will. And since it's really small rock, it requires a large volume. Some of the state guidelines for planting cobble, berms or cobble revetments as a nature-based solutions, they're like 50 to 100 feet wide. And do you really want that much cobble on your beach? It can affect the seasonal response of the beach. And we did consider that, but and it's still on the table, but we don't expect that in terms of protecting the railroad, it would be carried forward.
Thank you, Russ. Much appreciated. The next comment and question here is from Renee Lancaster. Given the importance of public access to San Clemente's beaches and trails, how will OCTA ensure that restoring the beach area and reopening continuous trail access is treated as a top priority alongside protecting the rail line? Next question is, can OCTA commit to a clear timeline and plan that not only stabilizes the bluff, but also guarantees residents and visitors can enjoy safe and reliable access to the coastline as soon as possible? So, George, we've got a couple questions there.
Yes. So, in terms of restoring the beach area and reopening continuous trail access, the purpose and goal and objective of this study is to really look at the short and the midterm, so 10 to 30 years out. So that, I would say, is, if you're asking for that question in terms of a timeline for, for today, for right now, OCTA is implementing the critical project areas, areas 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so that would be for that project team to consider. But in terms of, let's say, for the duration of this study, the 10 to 30 years out, that is a factor that will be considered. It's part of our evaluation criteria. And what you will see is that as we progress with this study in the next phase of refining the concepts and then developing the draft alternatives report, you'll see that within the evaluation criteria, and that will be a factor by which we evaluate every one of these draft alternative concepts. As for the second part of the question, can OCTA commit to a clear timeline and plan? I think what we can commit to is that it will be part of looking at it as an evaluation criteria for each of these alternative solutions.
Thanks, George. Yeah, I think it's important to remember too that we are in the study phase, right? We're developing these draft alternative concepts, and committing to a clear timeline and plan that stabilizes the bluff, et cetera, as you're asking, it isn't really part of this particular process at this point. But we will capture your comments and questions and keep that in mind. And as George said, trail access is a component of our criteria for selection on these. The next question here comes from Gideon Ong. What is the main danger to the rail? Slope bluff issues, wave storm issues, or something else? And on which parts?
Yeah, so that's why we ended up breaking down the entire 7.5 mile stretch into these 7 typical sections, because we wanted to be able to look at the existing conditions, how they vary across the mileposts, and to really look at what alternative concepts are applicable within each section on the bluff side, the rail side, or the beach side. And so it's a combination, as you've seen in the typical sections as they were presented. Some typical sections have all 3 that we need to consider, others just 2, others just 1. So it's all of the above sometimes.
Excellent. Thank you, George. Appreciate that. I'm going to turn back to the attendees list, those who want to speak, who have raised their hand. We're going to go to Kenneth Salter next. Mr. Salter.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I want to speak to the requirement on operational readiness. That's the percentage of time that the railroad must be available for traffic per whatever governmental or contractual requirements you have. And I want to say that what hurts operational readiness is the number of incidents, the number of times the surf gets through into the tracks, and the amount of time it takes to restore the system back to operational. So basically, how long does it take you to clean up? That's just as important in terms of meeting your top level requirement as is reducing the frequency of incidents. So I put forth that I think one of the solutions that should be listed on your sheet is reducing the mean time to restore. In other words, reducing the time it takes to get the railroad, the track running again after there's been an incident. That would, give you some relief in terms of not taking such draconian approaches, characteristic of items 1 through 4. Also, I wanted to say I think this is the first time I've seen elevating the rail on the list of possible solutions, and that one just sent shivers down my spine. That seems like a horrible idea to me. That's it.
Right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And now turning to Mr. Duncan, Chris Duncan, former council member, I believe.
Yeah, there we go. Yes, Chris Duncan here, former mayor of San Clemente and city council member. Thank you. Yes, I was happy to see on the slides an accounting for both the history. Of course, we're only talking about San Clemente here. That's almost the entirety of the 7 mile stretch. So happy to see that there was an accounting of the history of issues with the rail line on the coast in San Clemente. And also, I'm not sure if it's explicitly mentioned, but the reason there's a wide beach at North Beach, the reason that Casa Romanica has a tieback is because the citizens of San Clemente paid for that, and all the sand, by the way, at the pier area that's mentioned in your slides. So given that it's important to have a historical perspective of the changes along the coastline in San Clemente, and that the taxpayers and citizens of San Clemente have probably done more to protect the tracks than any other entity, I've got two questions. One is, how many representatives from San Clemente are on your design team that's reviewing all of this? And when will the OCTA reimburse San Clemente for the millions of dollars that the residents spent to protect the tracks? Thank you.
Appreciate those questions. Rebecca, I think I'm going to ask you to step in there. I think we can respond to the first one, but probably not the second one. First question was, is anybody, part of the, who is part of the team that is working on this from the city? Who from the city is part of the team working on this?
Well, there's a couple different people that we have that participate in our PDT, but Andy Hall has been very active. The city manager, Andy Hall, has been very active in participating on this study with us. And like I said, he's an active participant on the PDT, and which we have met with regularly as part of this process. And then there's a few other city staff. I don't have their names off the top of my head, but Andy Hall is very involved in this.
Yeah,
effort.
another one is I believe Public Works Director Dave Rebensdorf. There are a couple of other folks in his area who are also part of the PDT and have been involved in the study as well as the emergency projects. Leslia Meyerhoff, who I believe is actually on the call, and she has been part of the discussions as well. So we have a range of stakeholders that are from the city. Mr. Duncan. All right, Lisa Gant, next one on the list of attendees. If we can unmute Ms. Gant.
Hi, I'm Lisa Gant. The inclusion of hard armoring is very destructive to the beach, and it seems to sit very prominently on your list. The San Clemente community overwhelmingly and repeatedly has communicated that we want sand replenishment regularly placed on our beaches. We do not want the removal of a natural habitat like our sand dunes at the state beach, and we do not want excessive and enormous hard armoring with boulders and seawalls that will increase erosion and destroy our beaches. I repeatedly hear the phrase protect the rail line, but I don't often hear the same phrase when it's attached to our beach. Protecting our beach is a public concern. How do you intend to implement some genuine environmental stewardship, which, by the way, OCTA includes in its mission statement? And what are you doing right now to expedite sand placement on our beaches? And how are you going to limit hard armoring, as we know it's proven to be destructive to our beaches? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gant. George, if you could help us out with a couple of those questions.
Yeah, so as we progress to the next phases of the study, which would be the refinement side and then the draft of the feasibility study, that's when we get into all of the evaluation criteria. And this feedback that we're hearing today, that we've heard 2 weeks ago as well in the in-person public meeting, we are taking all of that and making sure that the evaluation criteria that we're going to be using is taken in consideration, all of these comments. And so, yes, there will be environmental factors in the evaluation criteria, and you will see that how all of that plays out in the next phases.
Excellent. Thank you, George. I want to say, Ms. Gant, also that it completely understand the concerns you have and that you've raised. We are taking a holistic approach, right? And which is something we've sort of dedicated ourselves to with respect to this study. It would be armoring in concert with natural solutions such as sand nourishment. And you talked about, you've heard a lot about protecting the rail line versus protecting the beaches, and we do have a responsibility to protect the rail line, which is why you're hearing that a lot. But sand nourishment is something that that we are also working toward. So it's on a separate track, not related to. It's related to the study in as much as it's a part of some of the draft alternative concepts, but there's separate action on sand. You can find out more about the details there on our emergency rail webpage. That's octa.net/rail emergencies, rail emergency. I'm going to come back to the Q&A section, which is getting longer and longer. Mr. McVeigh has been waiting patiently there. Have you considered any difference in bluff types along the corridor? Some bluffs are quite solid turbidite sandstones, while others are running shales and topsoils. The bluffs are really not necessarily our focus, but I'll let George jump in on that one.
Yes, so we are considering that, and our geotechnical engineers and geologists are looking at the different compositions of the bluffs. We do see some that are standing more vertically, others that are slightly more laid back, some with vegetations, others with not. So yes, all of those factors are being taken in consideration, and also determining what level of risk they might be posing in terms of their potential to fail. And that's how we're then looking at the type of alternative concepts that are applicable to different stretches.
Excellent. Appreciate it, George. Since we have so many comments and so many raised hands, I am going to, I'm not going to read the comments. You all can see them, but please know that we are capturing them. So thank you, Mr. Baker and Mr. Ray, for your comments. Appreciate that. Let's see. Mark Loria, City of San Clemente, has done a large mitigation at Casa Romanica, right? That is what Mr. Duncan brought up. Are you studying the work done at Casa, and will you use the experience of the City of San Clemente as you develop viable options? George, I think that's a good one for you as well.
Yes, so we are collaborating with the city in our PDT meetings, and all of the experience they're getting with the solution that they're implementing there. We have access to their staff, and we're able to ask the questions, and we've been collaborating very closely.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Loria, Mark Loria asks, which of these options best protects the beach? And second one, follow-up question, which best protects the beach trail?
Yeah, so we're right now just at the draft alternative concept phase. The intent is to move then into the refinement of the concept and into producing the report, which is really where the evaluation criteria becomes critical in how you use it to filter out what is that best, or there might be multiple best solutions. And so our desire is to go through that process and let the evaluation criteria do the filtering, so to speak. So that way we are looking at everything from multiple angles and really looking at the best solutions that rise to the top.
Thank you, George. One more here from the Q&A, and then I'm going to move back to the attendees. So Amanda Quintanilla, you'll be up next. But first, Ariana Gilbert Does a cost estimate exist for possibly moving the tracks inland? How does that cost compare to the alternatives presented here? I can take that one. Moving the tracks inland is part of a longer term, sort of beyond 30 years study that the state will lead. They'll analyze that as a potential long-term solution. There's no information that we have at this time about cost. And we're still in the preliminary stages of developing the alternative concepts. So we don't really have any costs to share there either. All right, moving to our list of participants, Amanda Quintanilla. Let's unmute Ms. Quintanilla's microphone, please.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, yes, thank you. I am supportive of the bluff side alternatives regarding the catchment walls with tiebacks, ground improvement, bluff stabilization, since this is the same work that has been done at Casa Romantica. There's also work to be done by our city at Marquita to protect the pump station. I support deep-rooted vegetation planting to reduce sediment erosion. I support drainage improvements since the city of San Clemente has a lot of groundwater that seeps from our bluffs that consists of capistronal land formation, which is comprised of siltstone and clay. And we have unstable land throughout San Clemente, and it's not just on our coastlines. I support shoreline protections that have sound nourishment or beach nourishment element attached to them. And I know that the OCTA is working with California Coast Commission for projects, and they recently approved 240,000 cubic yards of sand at area 1 and 2. And when looking at the beachside concepts, there are some concepts that I do approve, it's about protecting our rail lines for the economics on that, regarding the commerce going back and forth. And as far as one of the comments that was said, looking at our bluffs, some bluffs seem to be more stable than others. It's all Capistrano land formation and Monterey land formation, and that's the problem that we have. And we've had problems with our bluffs and since going back to the 20s. And we had the North El Camino Real closed in 1990, 1993, and that bluffs had to decrease in size because the bluffs were even taller. So for protection of the North El Camino Real, they had to protect that. But I thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Ms. Quintanilla. Appreciate that. Next up, don't actually have a name here, just DE and then P. And you should have received a message to unmute your microphone. All right, we'll move on to Ms. Babiars, Nina Babiars. Hopefully I said that correctly. I apologize if I butchered your last name.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thanks very much for this session. I also attended the one earlier in the month up at San Clemente. I'm down here in San Diego with public watchdogs, and some of the questions that I'm asking is, the intent of the study was to also evaluate, assess environmental risk as well as challenges related to the operations and maintenance of this critical segment of the Los San Rail Corridor. And so I'm just wondering why it ends at the county line when you've got, when we've all got 3.6 million pounds of radioactive nuclear waste that's going to be moved by rail if we can get it out of here. And I'm working with Congressman Mike Levin's task force since its inception on that. Even other things that were in the PowerPoints tonight with regard to sand replenishment. There are communities down here in San Diego that are talking about that. So I'm just wondering who's funded this study? Is it OCTA or is it the JPA, the Joint Powers Authority of the Low Sand Rail Corridor? And if it's the larger picture of this rail corridor actually being part of a strategic rail corridor that's critical to our national defense, why aren't we looking at this as a corridor-wide study as opposed to just Orange County? And then again, with regard to the environmental risks that we have at San Onofre, we've got a rail line that goes right in there, and all the buildings that are of lower grade radiation are already being dismantled and moved by rail out of there, which I'm sure you're aware of. So if we have an opportunity to move this radioactive nuclear waste, why isn't that being assessed as a part of this study? And again, I mentioned at San Clemente, since I got 30 more seconds, that I've been watching, I lived in Dana Point, lived in Laguna for many years. I've been taking photographs of Old Man's Beach for a decade that's been disappearing. The parking lot first went, and now the beach, the road is gone. I mean, that's right across the county line, and that's a risk that needs to be assessed in relation to this study. Thank you.
Thanks for your input and for your questions. Rebecca, I think what we want to be able to respond to there is, the purpose and need for the study, what our focus is there, and it is being funded by OCTA. Maybe you can speak to that, though.
There we go. Yep. So as far as this study aims to look at how we can stabilize the railroad through that section of the corridor and keep it protected in place to prevent closures to rail service, whether passenger, freight, what have you. So that is ultimately OCTA's primary focus. As we are a transportation authority, our focus is protecting the railroad in place. And that is our role. That's basically the primary aim of this study. And then as we are leading this study, yes, we are we're funding it, and then as an aside, we are also working in tandem with other stakeholders in the region that have their own separate sort of efforts ongoing alongside us to replenish the beach. So that would be like the city of San Clemente. They have their own initiatives. You have OC Parks, you have the county. So you have these different sort of entities having these different initiatives. So, but ultimately, while OCTA is coordinating very closely with all of these different stakeholders, our primary goal, again, is to focus on protecting the railroad in place to ensure that operations are safe, stable, and reliable until such time and we identify a longer term solution that Chris mentioned would ultimately be an effort led by the state.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. I'm going to come back to our Q&A. This one from Michelle Sinning is pretty extensive. But essentially, can you explain the rationale behind development of the beachside alternatives when the impacts to date have been slope failure on the bluff side? Let's start there if we can. George?
All right, I'm gonna ask Russ to jump into this. There's a lot that follows in terms of the behind that question with NOAA, with sea level rise. And so, Russ, do you want to jump in and take this question?
Chris, would you mind just repeating the question just so I do a good job of answering it? Thanks.
Sure, and I'll go a little bit more extensively into the background here. Can you explain the rationale behind development of the beachside alternatives when the impacts to date have been slope failure on the bluff side? Maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but on the NOAA sea level rise map interactive tool, the sea level would need to rise 9 feet before it started impacting the tracks. There's additional background about Public Policy Institute and their prediction of sea level rise, a NASA study, predicting sea level rise. Essentially, since everything in this Ms. Sinning's opinion appears to be a bluffside issue, why are we looking at beachside alternatives? But I don't think that's actually the case, right?
Yeah, well, we are looking at beachside alternatives because, we look at, when we consider sea level rise and vulnerabilities, we start with what present vulnerabilities are. And we certainly saw down at Cypress Shore a few years back that while there was bluff failures that contributed to railroad instability, but there was also significant shoreline erosion. And that beach historically, in recent years anyway, was maybe up to 100 feet wide. And then in a very short amount of time, that beach width narrowed by on the order of 100 feet. And we know that because those beaches are constantly or regularly monitored with beach profiles taking twice a year. So it's clearly a measurable thing that there was also problems on the beach side due to beach erosion. And so to protect the railroad from failure due to beach erosion, the emergency riprap was placed at that time. And so what we're looking at is trying to address these vulnerabilities, in the mid to longer term, where maybe it's not an emergency, but are they threatened now and will they be threatened more in the future? But we're dealing all up and down the coast with just narrowing beaches, and these problems exist now in a lot of places, and they will just be exacerbated in the future when sea levels accelerate. The rising accelerates.
Thank you, Russ. And the rest of the comment from Ms. Sinning talks about the impacting, the usability of San Clemente beaches the impact would be devastating to the San Clemente community. And she'd like to have future meetings show the true impact of the alternatives on beaches so the public can understand how much encroachment there is. And while I don't think the study will go deeply into that, certainly any additional phases would address that. I may be wrong about that, though. George or Russ, would you care to take that?
Yeah, I could take that one, Chris. At the study level, the study is looking at just developing your menu of options, if I could simplify it that way. And so future phases of project development, let's say, a project moves forward within typical section, 4, let's say, that's where that next future phase will look at everything, much more closely. And there will be a separate environmental document and all of those project development phases going on from there. At this point, this is just a feasibility study.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate you jumping in on there. Next, Devin Valdez leaves us a comment. I want to just make give you a reminder that any written comments, they have been received. We will log those and record those. They're all being captured, but we may not address every comment here today. So thank you, Ms. Sinning and Mr. Valdez. And Nina, looks like you have several additional questions here. I'm looking at I think Rebecca was able to respond to these. What we are, sorry, things moved on me here a little bit. There we go. OCTA is funding the study. It's not the Lausanne Rail Corridor. It is, it is for that 7 miles. That is our direction, from the board. That's our mandate. And the purpose of the study is to look at, alternatives that will help us stabilize the rail line, right? I mean, that's the objective, is to protect the rail line in place for the next 30 years. And that's what these alternative concepts look at. All right, we've got about 15 minutes left in the meeting. I'm going to move to a few more questions here. Kim Whitmore, how is OCTA ensuring that its immediate actions won't lock California into a 20th century coastal infrastructure model, one that sacrifices public beaches and delays the inevitable inland relocation of the Lausanne rail corridor? Given that long-term solutions will require federal investment and coordination, OCTA's decisions today must preserve both the beach and the flexibility to adapt. Appreciate that comment. The question, what safeguards are in place to prevent short-term fixes from becoming permanent mistakes? I would reiterate again, and George, you can jump in on this, but this is a study, right? We're developing a menu of options. I think it might be worth, talking about the criteria as well, George. That might be helpful. But this is we're at the study phase at this point.
That's right, Chris. I mean, at this study phase, I think the question might be asking, are we going to do something in the next 10 to 30 years that might impact or preclude or somehow have an effect on whatever long-term options are being considered? And so, in our evaluation criteria, at this moment, we're looking at what is impacting, the study area for the next 10 to 30 years. The long-term study that's going to become about by the state, I think that will probably be one of the things that they'll look into. How do some of these alternatives, impact what they are doing? And so we don't know yet if there's going to be some kind of an overlap in schedule between these two studies that's outside of our control. So I think that's all we know for now.
Thank you, George. All right. And Ms. Gant, you said, what are you doing to expedite sand replenishment? I think we spoke to you, spoke to that question. And then again, just a reminder, all comments that you are making in the chat, not in the chat rather, but in the Q&A, those are all being captured. So appreciate that. Mr. Walsh is asking what the consensus is to what we believe the sea level rise will be in 30 years. I'm going to say that that's probably not our area with respect to this. Russ, do you want to speak to that at all, or?
Yeah, I'll comment on that. We are paying close attention to it, and we're
Right.
following kind of the latest guidelines or the latest science on sea level rise. And so for the looking out to 30 years, like between 2050 and 2060, there's different scenarios based upon, for example, risk tolerance and things like that. And so for like a intermediate high to a high scenario, the range of sea level rise out by 2050, 2060 is between like 1.5 to 2 feet, which is, it's not the 9 feet we've talked about earlier, but it is definitely significant when you think of, high water level being 1 to 2 feet higher than it is now. Will definitely require some strong considerations of what to do, during the time period after that. And those are projections, but that's based upon the latest science as of 2024.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Russ. Diane Etchison is asking, she's mentioning that the sand replenishment at Doheny didn't last long. Can you explain where you believe the replenishment sand is going? You know, I think that's a little sort of just outside of our project area, our study area, perhaps, but it may be a good question that we're able to provide some information on.
Maybe I'll just, since I'm still on the camera here, a lot depends upon, in terms of these beach nourishments. I think the one that was up at Doheny, that was more of a smaller scale, and I don't have the number, you know, right in front of me, but I think it's maybe on the order of 30 to 40,000 cubic yards. I just recall it was not a large scale amount of sand, and so given the amount of, you know, it depends upon how much wave activity and things like that, but once you place sand on the beach, Mother Nature will move it along, and just that's kind of a small volume. It helps in the short term, but San Clemente and other places, they just need larger amounts of volumes to really, you know, widen the beach significantly over a sufficient length to really stabilize the shoreline as a whole. And so those tens of thousands of cubic yards, they're good. It demonstrates the technology and the capability that we can nourish the beaches. But to make a real impact, you know, on a regional basis, we got to be looking up in the hundreds of thousands, such as that's the scale that the regional beach sand 3 for San Diego, which includes San Clemente, is those are the types of volumes that they're talking about, and the ones that we've been talking about as well. So that's the order of magnitude that we're talking about. So yeah, they're useful. It's good that we learn a lot from them, but they're more like pilot projects, those smaller scale projects.
Thanks, Russ. That's very helpful. Looks like we've got Ms. Quintanilla has raised her hand again. You can unmute her mic. Ms. Quintanilla, you'll need to unmute as well. While we're working on that, Ms. Gant says in the Q&A, the study phase looks a lot like the last study phase. When are you going to have a real plan instead of waiting to declare emergencies? And I want to emphasize that this is, you know, we're talking about two separate things here, right? If there are emergencies that happen, we have to deal with those immediately. This study is again meant to provide sort of a menu of options that we could implement across this 7-mile stretch in areas that are not in immediate need of addressing to ensure that rail service continues. So again, we're focused on studying the details at this point in time. Ms. Quintanilla, it looks like you're able to jump on. All right. I would suggest you type into the Q&A if you have additional comments, and we can take them from there. One of the questions that came up from Nina here is, where can the public find tonight's PowerPoint slides, and what are the other opportunities and deadlines for the public to provide the input you seek? This is an ongoing process. The slides can be found at octa.net/CRRS. There's a PDF of the PowerPoint that is available from the July 15th meeting for those who would like it. The audio recording of that meeting is also available there. We will have the audio recording of this meeting. Actually, it's going to be probably both, but we'll have that available to you hopefully by the end of the week. Depends on how long it takes us to turn that around. Meanwhile, we will be able to supply the PDF of the PowerPoint here. It's the same one that's up there, though. So if you want to take a look at the one that's from July 15th, you'll be able to find the same exact thing there. And with respect to the input, this is an ongoing process. We're going to take the information that we've gathered from various stakeholders, from our partners, partner agencies, from the general public, and we will consider that as we're further developing these alternative concepts. We'll be coming back to the public down the line here once we have made those revisions and refinements. So we'll be going through this process again, where we'll have an in-person meeting and a virtual meeting, and we'll share the revised concepts. Thank you, Nancy, for putting up the next step slide again. So as you can see where we are, draft concept development, we're going to refine those concepts. We intend to come back to the public and continue talking to stakeholders and various folks later this year and early next year. That is our thinking at this point. And then we'll work on a feasibility study report, and which will sort of contain everything. And we are hoping to get feedback from the public on that in the middle of 2026, summer 2026. Then we'll have a final report toward the end of next summer, and that's something we'll be presenting to our board in fall of 2026. So that's our schedule. There'll be another chance to provide comment on the refined concepts later this year and early next year. Don't know if we have any additional questions. Ms. Whitmore, thank you for the opportunity to participate virtually. You're quite welcome. We find this is a great way to get public involvement, right? It's easy. You don't have to drive anywhere. So we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to participate and to provide your comments. Again, just a reminder, everything that you've written into the Q&A field, we are capturing. We appreciate that. And if there are no other questions, is there a way to sign up to receive emails? Yes, we can put that. In fact, Jessica, if you can put that into the chat, that would be good. That would be our direct to the website, octa.net/CRRS. There is a page, Stay Informed there, a tab for Stay Informed, and you can sign up for emails that way. Appreciate that. There you go. That's the longer URL. All right. I want to say thank you. I appreciate everybody's time tonight. It's always good to have a robust conversation around studies like this. You can see on your screen now, that's my contact information and Rebecca, our project manager's contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. The best email to use, though, so that we ensure that the full team gets notified about your email and that it doesn't get lost in an individual's email, is to use CRRS@octa.net. That's CRRS@octa.net. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time. Have a good night.